I have an aspiration to leverage technology to make a meaningful difference in the lives of 1 billion people. 1 billion people? Really? Just saying it sometimes feels so daunting and overwhelming. And yet when I think of the number of people that there are in this world, I wonder if 1 billion is even enough. Through my work, I've had the opportunity to travel to a number of countries, and I've seen some of the most beautiful places and some of the poorest. And I've often wondered, what was it that set these countries apart? They both had amazing people, but what was it that caused some people to have so much and others did not? And more importantly, was there anything that I could do to help them? I was a busy mother of 3. I was married, thinking I had a challenging job. And how could I, as a single individual, make any kind of meaningful impact in the world? I just felt like these were not problems I created. These weren't things that I thought as an individual I could help fix. And yet I felt utterly compelled to do something more than I was doing. And I kept hearing this little voice in the back of my head, a voice that my parents had talked about all the time as I was growing up, about the fact that we must always leave things better than we found them. I just remember the story. I was 14 years old, and as Sarah said, I'm the youngest of 7. And I was getting my own room for the very first time. And we were getting ready to paint the room. It was going to be a pale blue, which is one of my favorite colors. And we had borrowed a stepladder from the neighbor. It was one of those silver ones. It was about 6 feet high, and it was covered in paint. And after a few hours, we finished painting, and I was getting ready to return the ladder. And my father stopped me and he said, "Cindy, remember, we must always leave things better than we found them. So go get the turpentine and get some steel wool and clean off the paint." I think based on the horror that was on my face, he reminded me again that returning things better than you found them was what was expected of us as individuals. And so I took the turpentine and I cleaned it off, because he wasn't just talking about the blue paint that we had gotten on it. He meant all of it. And I can tell you that it was definitely not something that my 14-year-old self had any excitement about doing. But what I came to realize is that leaving things better than I found them has become just one of my core beliefs. I have an innate desire to help other people. It's something I really get a tremendous amount of enjoyment from. There are so many things that we as individuals can do to have a meaningful impact. And when I think about the things that I've been able to do in my life, I can look back and say, yes, actually, as an individual, you can have a meaningful impact. I've mentored hundreds of people. I do a lot of inspirational speeches in front of audiences of thousands. I've developed and implemented technology in companies that have added billions of dollars of value that have translated into local economies. I felt like I really wasn't doing enough, but in actuality, I was realizing I was starting to impact hundreds of thousands of people. And it gave me this idea that, well, maybe I could help 1 million people. I moved to South Africa about 4 years ago. And I started to learn about a concept from a book called Exponential Organisations by Salim Ismail. And part of this concept is about needing to have a massive transformational purpose and to take your goals and multiply them exponentially. It was there that my idea of helping 1 million people became 1 billion. But what I've come to realize is you can't get to 1 billion with incremental thinking. You have to act and think completely differently. You have to take in ideas that you'd never thought of before. It was really quite profound in terms of moving my mind into a new way of thinking. Through implementing technologies and the people I worked with, I probably touched 100,000. And I can't even imagine how much local impact was created by the work that we had been doing. But that's not always enough. And that we really need to think about how can we, if we want to touch 1 billion people, do it in a way that's sustainable. And I think what I've come to learn is that it's not any individual needing to do stuff. But the more I brought voice to my vision, the reality is I found that so many other people's visions were similar to my own. By coming together, we could actually achieve far more than we ever expected. One of the things that I saw when I was in South Africa was a young man named Siyakuza, and he was from a poor township right outside of Durban. And although his family had absolutely nothing, through his own ingenuity, he'd gone on to create a type of rocket fuel. He won an international science fair and a 4-year scholarship from Harvard University. And I began to think, how many more people like him were there in the world? How many more people, if we help them unleash their potential, can solve some of the world's biggest problems? I was always looking at the way in which I could take this concept of leaving things better than I found it and marrying it with this exponential thinking, and then taking this love of technology that I'd had my whole career and bringing it all together, finding that we could make a meaningful change in the world. Earlier today, we heard about Andrea talking about 13.5 million people who are digitally and financially excluded. Gaia told us about how technology could connect girls in Ethiopia and potentially the 500 million girls around the world. We talked about the 1 in 10 neurodivergence and how we could use technology to help them. And in fact, many people on the autism spectrum are particularly good at technology-based jobs. And Helen is a great example of that. Kayla is our rock star, and she's using technology to deliver clean energy. And Pin talked to us about the 1.4 billion people living in poverty, and that through technology and through data, we could help make the invisible visible. We won't get to 1 billion people by working by ourselves. We need to come together and look at the way that each of our own aspirations can then be amplified by the people in this room and outside of this room. And I think it's the number one thing I've learned going through the Leader's Voice, is that it's actually the amplification of our vision. It's the amplification of our aspirations that becomes the most powerful force that we have. When I think back to the day I said I'd like to touch 1 billion people through technology, I can tell you it felt like a daunting task. I didn't actually know if I really believed that I could do that. But what I've come to realize is the more I bring voice to my aspiration, the more clarity I bring to my vision, that I'm finding that there's this network of people all around me that can help bring this to life. I don't think my father ever expected that his life lessons would be shared in the Houses of Parliament. But I do think he expected me to always leave things better than I found them. And I think by working together, collectively, we can leave the world better than we found it. And I think he would be very proud. Thank you.